Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Haze, and in today's video, we're on the Dragonflight PTR pre-patch. Going to be taking a look at Frost DK Talents and kind of discussing with you guys the idea of what I chose, why I chose it, and kind of just going over a overall review of what's going on over here on these Frost DK Talents. And then we'll go ahead and, I suppose, touch on the other side, because I can imagine you probably want to talk about that. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. So let's go ahead and start covering these Frost DK talents. Now the first thing we're going to be choosing obviously is Frost Strike, because I mean in the beginning you pretty much have to choose your bread and butter abilities. Howling Blast, Obliterate, you know, it makes it seem like it's a choice, but for the most part these first ones are pretty straightforward. You need those to deal damage. And the two things we're really going to be heavily relying on for damage, at least with this build, is Obliterate and Howling Blast. So going down the talent tree, we've got Improved Frost Strike, we've got Unleashed Fury. Now both of these are fairly good talents. We're going to take them both to increase our single target damage, increase our strength percentage, stacking up to 3 times, and of course just increased overall Frost Strike damage, which not necessarily something I feel like we need, but you're definitely going to have to go into that just so you can go into Pillar of Frost for the extra strength. I mean, that's kind of, you know, it's definitely a need. Now as for the Rhyme proc over here, Obliterate has a 60% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to consume no runes and deal 300% damage. Amazing. Gonna go ahead and take that because we definitely need that, because we are going to rely heavily on our Obliterate damage, which this increases Obliterate damage by 10%, so we're definitely going to take that. And we're going to rely heavily on our Howling Blast damage. Now if Howling Blast crits, it does crit near Obliterate damage, which is actually insane. We haven't seen that since Legion, which is going to give us quite a bit more burst pressure as long as it crits inside of our burst window. Now next up we have Frost Reap, which, I mean, obviously we're going to take this. Killing Machine also causes your next Obliterate to deal frost damage. It's going to be key. We're going to be scaling it up with our Mastery to make our Obliterates hit really hard, and obviously, you know, why wouldn't we increase our frost damage as frosting? Anyways, so going over this talent, this is going to be one of the interesting ones. It's Frigid Executioner and Raise of the Frozen Champion. Both of these are really good, and I've found different reasons to use both of them. I have actually been falling more for the Rage of the Frozen Champion. Obliterate has a 15% chance to trigger Rhyme, and Howling Blast generates 8 runic power when Rhyme is active. So it does generate you a little bit of extra runic power, and it would take potentially, what, 3 procs to actually equal the amount of runic power you're going to be gaining from the runes that this Obliterate is going to, the Frigid Executioner is going to proc for you. And it also is going to give you 10% more Obliterate damage. So up rises the question of which one of these is going to generate you more runic power over time, and which one of them is going to give you extra damage. Now me personally, I'm going to be relying a little bit more on the Howling Blast side of it. Previously I was sitting Frigid Executioner because I like to make my Obliterates hit as hard as possible, but I do see the value of the Howling Blast we currently have and the one we're going to have in the future, which is going to hit even harder than what we can achieve on the PTR, which is something I'm also excited for, because we're going to do a lot more damage once we level up than what we're dealing in the PTR, which is really cool. I'm going to go ahead and put a point into Pillar. Obviously we're going to take that. Next up, Murderous Efficiency. Consume a Killing Machine effect has 50% chance to grant you 1 rune. Obviously just for overall rotation, we're going to be taking it. Next up we got Nocturnal Assault. It's just going to give you some extra frost damage on your Obliterates. Obviously it's going to increase your burst and overall be a fairly good talent. Now this is where things got kind of interesting for me on like what I'm going to choose. Frostwhelp Aid is what I'm going to go into, just for the extra mastery. Now I know it's nerfed in PvP combat, and it's not going to give you 8%, it's only going to give you 2%, but it's still a nice amount of mastery to increase your overall damage. Now the other reason we're going down this side of the tree is we want Empowered Rune Weapon over here. Now Empowered Rune Weapon is going to be key for your burst, because without Empowered Rune Weapon your burst is really going to feel like it's lacking. Now that's also going to have an effect later on whether or not you're choosing like Empowered Rune Weapon down here on the other side or Abomination Limb. Me personally, I do like running double Empower, believe it or not, for that really nice burst I can put into people for single target. Abomination Limb obviously mechanically is going to be extremely powerful in like 3 situations, but I do enjoy having that extra damage, especially when it comes to DPS versus DPS scenarios. Next up we got Ice Cap. Now Ice Cap used to be an N tier talent, literally right next to Obliteration and Breath, because it was so good. Now we're going to definitely take that because Obliteration guarantees crits, which equals cooldown reduction on Pillar, which means we're going to have a much faster Pillar rotation overall, which is something I really enjoy that we have, because I just, you know, outside of Pillar we had a lot of downtime and it really didn't feel that good, but being that we can burst more, instead of having it just on our sleeve. I mean, not necessarily what we're looking for, but overall, it will still feel a heck of a lot better than it used to. I'll have to say, definitely. Now, next up, we can't go lower down because we don't have enough points to spend. So I'm going to go 1 into Remorseless Winter, which is going to give us Remorseless Winter back, which just obviously deals AoE pressure over 8 seconds and reduces their movement speed by 20%. Now, this is something you can kind of throw up during your burst to give you a little bit of extra proc damage and maybe slow the target. It's probably not going to be that effective, but I mean, it's free. Why not? We'll pretty much take it. Well, not free. It takes a talent, but we have to take it because we want improved Rhine. This increases Howling Blast damage done by an additional 75%. 75%. That is massive. That's like that's a ridiculous amount of increase. I'm not gonna lie. Like we're definitely taking that. So this is where things, to me, left me kind of indifferent about what life choices I'm going to be making for these talents. Now, we can't choose Might of the Frozen Waste yet. Even though I really want to, we can't choose it because the fact is we have 5 points left. And to get Obliteration, which is literally the go-to for, you know, any Obliterate build. Like you're literally, you cannot even burst without having Obliteration. So currently in the PTR, dual wield is going to be better than two-hander because you can't take Might of the Frozen Waste. When we level up, we will get 5 extra points to put into our talents, which will allow us to change will allow us to change it a little bit. We'll be able to take, obviously, our Might of the Frozen Waste, which is what I'll definitely go into for an extra 30% Obliterate damage. Amazing. And next up, I'll be taking Icebreaker after that. When empowered, Rime Howling Blast deals 30% increased damage to primary targets. That's going to be another 60% on top of our amazing Howling Blast damage we could already do if that crits. Literally, it's as hard as your Obliterates. It's actually kind of insane to see it back up there, but it's really cool to see that dealing extra damage. And then after that, so I'm going to have 1 talent point there, 2 into Icebreaker. I'm going to put 1 into Avalanche. Now, Avalanche isn't necessarily an amazing talent, but it will increase our Howling Blast damage. But there's something it does now that it used to not do. It applies Razor Ice to the target, which is going to increase our Frost damage on our Obliterates and our Howling Blast and any of our Frost Strikes we're going to use on the target by, you know, quite a bit more. And being that we're going to be changing out our force set with our current armor later on, we're definitely going to need to find a way to get Razor Ice stacks using a two-hander. Otherwise, our damage is obviously going to be a bit less than it would be, and it would put dual wield up closer, comparable with two-hander. But the fact that we can get that with a two-hander is actually really cool. So I'll be left with 1 extra talent. Now, this one last talent for me was kind of hard to choose where I wanted to put it. And I think I'm actually leaning towards Invigorating Freeze, which you can generate runic power based off of the targets that have Frost Fever on them. So in like AoE situations, you'll most likely be able to heal yourself up quite a bit. Now we're going to go ahead and go over some of these other talents we didn't choose into, and I'll go ahead and explain them and talk about them. Obviously, Cold Heart, PvE talent. Very good for proccing up single target burst. If I was making a single target build, I most likely would use this, as it's very good. Enduring Strength is a okay talent. Now, we did have this back in BFA, which we attempted to chain this together with our pillars to pretty much give us a just a never-ending burst, essentially. And it never, like, it worked pretty good, but it never really played out as much as we would have liked it to. Another talent that seems really cool is Shattering Blade. Now, we have seen this before. It had a different name, and for some reason, I think it's like Shattering Strikes. And it's a really cool ability, and as long as you can deal a lot of frost damage, this would be an amazing increase to our Frost Strikes. But Frost Strikes are still underwhelming in comparison to other abilities, so playing like a dual-wield build while dumping Frost Strikes doesn't necessarily, to me, feel like a very viable option because of all the Howling Blast increases, and of course all the damage you can get from Obliterate and converting Obliterate into Frost damage. So that's not something I really will be looking into. In terms of consistent pressure, I could see it being good. Potentially in terms of consistent like PvE boss DPS pressure for like an overall dual wield melee build that most likely isn't relying on Breath of Sindragosa. but potentially, for the most part, I don't see me looking into that talent a little bit further than that. Now, down at the bottom, we have Frostworm's Fury, which is our big dragon. We can deal a lot of burst pressure with that. And, of course, at the very bottom, you could actually get the stun back if you wanted to play, like, a Chill Streak build and still set up that big AoE CC with, like, Abomination's Limb, Blind into the Frostworm's Fury stun and throw out Chill Streak, which ends up being, you know, a fairly strong combo. But me, you guys know me personally, I'm a sucker for them big obliterate builds, so that's exactly what I went into. So going on the a little bit more on the right hand side after we explain those, we've got Runic Command, which increases your runic power by 10. This is something you do if you wanted to like play a runic dump build, which, you know, we've talked about previously not being the greatest thing currently. So probably won't look into that talent. After that, we've got Frost Scythe, which is an amazing PvE talent, which is heavily nerfed in PvP. This talent, I'm not gonna lie, was one of the most fun I've ever had in a battleground when it wasn't nerfed. And if they could somehow make this a viable talent inside PvP, please do so, because that is one of the most fun things I've ever used in a battleground. Like, work on it a little bit, tweak it or something, but like, that is fun. Like, fun, just highlight that button. Fun. But anyways, going on about the other talents, Horn of Winter is something I was actually tempted to try to work into this build, but it just fundamentally didn't seem to be able to be put in and take a lot of the damage improvements I wanted to really give me extra pressure. Biting Cold, so pretty much this whole talent right here, this whole talent row, is going to be making Remorseless Winter stronger, which is going to be more like PvE situations. Now, in Battlegrounds, you could use this to proc up a lot of extra cleave damage if you wanted to like pad meters, but overall in terms of PvE, I probably won't be looking into those too much. Because it's not really burst pressure, as I said, it's more overall kind of, you know, gnawing pressure, and I really want to play into that burst side of things. Now, Chill Streak is actually very interesting currently, and I'm not going to lie, I was very tempted in that last talent point whether I wanted to take Invigorating Freeze or I wanted to take Chill Streak, because both of them are going to be extremely good in their own right. Now, if I wanted to just get more overall burst pressure, I would definitely go into the Chill Streak. And there is actually an improvement down here for Chill Streak, which I did find very interesting. Now, there's one that enemies suffer 5% increased damage from Chill Streak over time when they're struck by it. Fairly good. I mean, it could definitely cause it to thump a little bit harder. Now, the other side is Chill Streak's bounce range is increased by 2 yards, and each time Chill Streak bounces, it has a 20% to increase the maximum number of bounces by 1. I don't really like the bottom part of it. That has like a 20% chance to bounce more, because it's going to add in a lot of RNG. Also, being that you use this in PvE, if you end up, you know, procking the lottery on RNGs and enduring chill bounces like, what, 6 extra times or something, could be a little nutty, but I mean, it could be fun to use at the same time. Now, the increase in range has been a weakness of Chill Streak for a very long time. I've got to be honest, 2 yards sounds okay, but overall, not going to make much of a difference, because usually when people get out of this, they're not just going 2 yards. Usually they're going 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, and they're, you know, they're literally trying to outdistance the DK because he's already bursting anyways. So overall, I'm going to think that the yard range is gonna make it slightly easier, maybe bounce once or twice while people are running away, but overall I'm not really gonna be counting on that. I don't feel like to increase my Chill Streak damage, because if you set up Chill Streak correctly and the enemies have already trinketed, they're gonna sit through the CC and get hit by it anyways, and that range really isn't gonna help you if you set up your burst correctly. I kind of feel like that's more like if you made a mistake and they're a little bit out of the range, it could help you, but it's not really enough to make it amazing. So we've talked about Icebreaker, we've talked about Invigorating Freeze, because that's one of the fun talents. And of course at the bottom we've got Breath of Sindragosa, usually like the go-to single target build currently in WoW. So I did find out something kind of interesting though. Now we do get 5 extra points, right? I talked about that, and you know, like Avalanche is going to be a great frost damage increase and Might of the Frozen Ways. I honestly thought about like what it'd be like to play this exact build. Go dual wield and go Icebreaker, Invigorating Freeze, Breath of Sindragosa. Now you can take literally Ice Cap, Obliteration, and Breath of Sindragosa. Now I currently can't try that. I would like to, but I'm not in beta, so listen here, Blizzard. Okay, doesn't matter. Anyways, so moving on. So again, we're relying heavily on our Howling Blast damage, right? And of course, we're generating runic power from our Howling Blast, which is going to give us an overall better consistency when it comes to Breath of Sindragosa. And we're not going to be touching our Frost Strike. So overall, all of our Frost or Runic Power is going to be dumped into Breath of Sindragosa, which is not something I really would like to do in PvP. I mean, you could even pull this off in PvP most likely, which is going to be absolutely a nutty amount of burst. But being that you could also take double in power, you can literally burst Sindragosa long enough to basically hit your secondary pillar burst in an overall single rotation. And that could be something we see in the future for single target DPS. Definitely could see that for single target DPS, whether or not they're taking the obliteration part of it or not. But it would give you burst outside of breath, which is on a 2-minute cooldown, and being that we have damage reduction, it would give you secondary burst on obliteration and a change in rotation, and possibly even an increase in skills cap to be able to combine these 3 endgame talents all at the same time, which is going to be insane to see. Now we've kind of covered these right hand talents. Now we're going to go ahead and cover the left side talents, which are kind of just generic Death Knight talents currently on the PTR. So let's talk about it. So over here on the right side, we've got Chains of Ice. Obviously, you need Chains to slow the target. I mean, that's fundamentally what you're going to need for PvP. For PvE, I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't need that, actually. I mean, maybe. I don't know. Anyways, we've got Mind Freeze, which I thought was pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and spec into that. I should probably just reverse my talents here and kind of go down the talent tree, too. It doesn't seem I'm able to. Kind of like the other tree. I don't know what's going on with this. So let's go ahead and go down. We need Blinding Sleet. That's going to be Disorient for 5 seconds, which is going to be really strong. It's also used to set up your burst. If you're like running Frostworm's Fury, Stun, and Chill Streak build, you're definitely going to need that. So definitely play into that for the extra CC. Icebound Fortitude. Your blood freezes, granting immunity. It's literally, I'd say, your best defensive cooldown outside like Anti-Magic Show. You're going to be needing that. There's cooldown reduction on it, which I also spec'd to, which I did find really cool, that you can have it on a 2-minute cooldown. Most people's cooldowns are on like a 2-minute cooldown or a 1-minute cooldown rotation, so it lines up nicely with that, so you're definitely going to want to take that. As for Merciless Strikes, increase critical chance by 2%. I just took it for the extra damage. I didn't think I had enough points to go into other things, I believe somewhere around this point, so I went into that for the extra pressure. Now this one's interesting. Proliferating Chill. Now, this ability right here, Chains of Ice, affects 1 additional enemy. You can chains a target and a DPS at the same time. Now, in terms of 2s, you will see me hitting chains on like the healer and the DPS constantly to peel while also DPSing on the healer and keeping him close. This literally just does it for you. I mean, it's actually an amazing ability. It's going to save you runes, which is going to increase your overall damage, and you're going to be able to actually control the situation a lot easier than you could recently, which is really cool to see, especially if you're not very good at switching targets. Now next up we have Asphyxiate, just for the 5-second CC, obviously a stun, really good to use in DPS versus DPS, and of course the extra CC when it comes to Arena is going to be really strong, especially being that it's on a 45-second cooldown. Next up I took Wraith Walk. Now the reason I took Wraith Walk and not something else like Anti-Magic Zone or something, which would also be a cool option to take, I'm not going to lie, it'd be very strong to go into that. And of course like Assimilation, if you're fighting casters, would be really, really strong. But there's something I know about playing from Classic. It's that taking like Wraithwalk and going to the Will and Acropolis. Will and Acropolis is an OP tanking ability that you use with your blood spec when you're trying to like solo raid bosses and things like that. Will and Acropolis is an absolute beast, and in terms of PvP survivability, it's really going to save your life in a lot of situations. And also being the fact that you can see up top near Deathstrike, we'll talk about those soon. Deathstrike is going to give you quite a bit more survivability. Now, I thought about Draw Blood, but I also realized that Draw Blood is probably going to be a negative, and you're probably wondering why. Heals you for 4,000 health from nearby enemies, can occur every minute if you fall below 30%, which would push you above 30%. But I realized you kind of want to be in that 30% range if you're going to be near killing if you're taking Will and Acropolis anyways, because the cooldown reduction is going to be more beneficial than healing for 4,000 health. And if this literally heals you slightly above granting you like the Will and Acropolis buff, and then somebody hits you really hard and you don't have the damage reduction, it's probably going to be a pain. You probably don't want that, and it's kind of what I rationalized with that. Now obviously we're taking Runic Attune to generate more runic power. It's going to be amazing. You know, extra runic power, Death Strikes, why wouldn't you do it? Next up we got Insidious's Chill. Not necessarily something I wanted to take, but we went into it anyways. Your auto attacks reduce the target's attack speed by 5% for 30 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. Auto attacks They do deal damage, but they're not necessarily massive, at least not for us as Frost DKs, so it wasn't really that big of a talent for me to choose. Now, back in like, Wrath Classic, that would be amazing, that we do use that quite a bit. Now, Icy Talons, your runic power spending abilities increase your melee attack speed by 6% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, 18%. I mean, melee attack speed, woo, I guess. It's not really that big of a deal in the current game, but I guess, we do generate runic power off our melee auto attack, so I guess it helps a little bit. Next up, we got Empower Rune Weapon. Now, I was kind of split whether or not I wanted to take Abomination Limb or I wanted to take a secondary Empowered Rune Weapon, but being that we are playing kind of like a cooldown reduction build, this actually causes me to have a very strong burst at my secondary burst if I'm able to force cooldowns on somebody, or it'll give me overall better survivability. Whether I'm fighting DPS versus DPS or something along those lines, it'll actually make it quite a bit better. Now, the nice thing about Abomination's Limb with our build is you're going to gain Rhine instantly every 4 seconds, which is really good, being that we play a Howling Blast build and we're playing Obliteration. It actually links our rotation together pretty well. So honestly, I'd say both these talents would be fairly strong for what we're playing inside PvP combat, and necessarily neither one would be the wrong choice. But I would say, like, if you're fighting a range comp inside 3s or something, I could definitely see Abomination Limb being more beneficial to set up a burst or damage than Empowered Rune Weapon. And of course, if you're playing like a Chill Streak build, you'd most likely want to go into Abomination Limb just to be able to control your targets and set them up for the overall burst damage. So next up, we're going to be talking about the Death Strike talent tree. Now, this right here, you're definitely going to go into Death Strike. Like, literally bread and butter, how your self-survivability, you're going to want that. Next up, Anti-Magic Shell. You can't survive without Anti-Magic Shell. Spec into it, guys. It's literally bread. You can't just not take it. It's one of our main things, guys. And something that's really important. Now, probably one of the craziest increases. Improved Death Strike. Death Strike's cost is reduced by 10 and its healing is increased by 60%. 60. I'm just going to let that sit in, guys. Death Strike has become an amazing healing ability. Basically, like, earlier in the expansion of what we were playing in live, Death Strike really wasn't feeling that great. But a 60% increase on healing and a reduction in the runic power. I mean, Death Strike is going to be healing for almost like 10k currently. We got, I'd say the average health pool is probably like 70 to 80k. And ours can probably get up to about 90k with Veteran of the Third War, which Death Strike heals by percentage. So that's going to increase the overall healing effectiveness of your Death Strikes, making you even more tanky and granting you quite a bit more survivability. Amazing to take these as a combo together. Something I found to be actually pretty great. Next up, I went with Raise Dead. Obviously, you're going to be able to ghoul sank this little guy to give yourself a little bit of extra healing, which is nice to do. Now, this is another golden talent, is Cleaving Strikes, which is something I've always wanted to use, but being that I wasn't using Night Fae, I never really got to experience Cleaving Strikes other than testing it out. And it's really cool to see at baseline because we're going to be able to cleave our obliterates. You imagine a big old Howling Blast proc for like 20k and then a massive obliterate that cleaves 2 targets. Like, we are dealing quite a bit more cleave damage, even our single target build, than we did previously, which is something I found really cool. So after Sacrificial Pact, we got our little heal. Now, this ability is really cool. It's called Brittle. Your diseases have a chance to weaken your enemies, causing your attacks against them to deal 6% increased damage. Straightforward, 6% extra damage on our obliterates. I'm going to go ahead and take that. And last, but obviously not least, is Might of Thessarian, which increases your strength by 2%. And being that pillar increases your strength by percentage-wise, it becomes a little bit multiplicative and overall gives you quite a bit more power. Some other things that obviously I thought were a bit interesting. Obviously, Permafrost, something we kind of ignore most of the time, unless we're doing like PvE content where for some reason we're attempting to tank as Frost, which actually I don't know if it's going to be 100% viable, but being that Frost has Will and Necropolis, I'm kind of curious to see if people can come up with some kind of like Frost tanking spec again. It will be interesting to see. But overall, I'm not really counting on it. Now, some things, we'll go ahead and cover some other things. We got Control Undead. Not necessarily something I want to take as Frost. Doesn't really appeal to me that much. Death Pact is also a really good talent, especially in like 1v1 scenarios. but I did not go into it. Now, if I was going to spec out of, like, let's say I want to take off Will and Necropolis, I probably would go into Death Pact. But I just know how good this talent overall is, and especially in arena situations, that's just literally a passive defensive that procs on its own. It's going to be really solid. Now we got like Clinching Grasp. We're going to cover some of the other talents, which are mainly like the Unholy side. Now, as you can see from these 3 talent trees, there's like Frost left side, Blood middle, Unholy right for different kinds of abilities. So talking about Clinching Grasp, it's going to take 50% movement speed for 6 seconds. It's, you know, just an overall slow when you grip. Probably not something I'd look into too hard. Increase Lichborn duration by 2 seconds, while also active damage taken is reduced by 15%. Actually, really cool defensive cooldown with Lichborn. I know it was pretty popular in the current expansion to actually get the extra defensive from it, which, I mean, how could you go wrong with an extra defensive? Might as well. Unholy Ground, gain 5% haste while you remain in your Death and Decay. I mean, that's pretty cool, but overall as Frost, I guess I would be interested in it. But overall, I'm not going to weigh heavily to like drop other things off to go to it, but it would be overall beneficial for sure. Considering if you are playing Cleaving Strikes, it's already going to be on the ground, and you'll get extra haste from it, which is pretty cool. And we got Death's Echo. Death's Advance, Death and Decay, and Death Grips have 1 additional charge, which this is actually going to be a solid ability for like PvE content, definitely. I can already see it now. If you're going like completely PvE Frost, you are definitely going to be taking Death's Echo to get 2 Death and Decays to just completely smash on them Cleaving Strikes, which is actually really cool PvE customization. I'm not going to lie. That actually is really cool. Next up at the bottom, we got Unholy Bond. Increases the effectiveness of your Rune Forge by 10%. You know, extra Fallen Crusader, extra Razor Ice, things like that. It's just going to be an overall single target increase on damage, which I could definitely see PvE Frost Decays specking into this deep in this tree, because that is pretty strong. And then maybe even going further over to the right, like Rune Mastery. This is something that does have me interested. I do want to kind of keep a look on this, as it does increase your strength by 3% for 5 seconds. So once I do get levels up and I can spec in a couple different things, I mean, I could definitely see myself going for Death's Echo just so I can cleave harder on people. But I could also see myself going towards Rune Mastery to increase my overall burst pressure by increasing my strength by, what, 6% for 8 seconds after using runes. Absolutely amazing to use. And of course, last but not least, we got Soul Reaper. It strikes the enemy for a little bit of Shadow Frost damage, which is cool that it's Shadow Frost. And after 5 seconds, it's basically an execute. And if the target's below 35% health, it's going to explode, dealing shadow damage to the target. And if the enemy that yields honor experience or dies within the effect of Soul Reaper, you gain Runic Corruption, which is, I believe, going to grant you like Runic Power, Haste, something along those lines. I forgot exactly what it was, honestly. It's been so long since I played Unholy, I don't remember. But it's going to grant you Runic Corruption. I believe it was like Runic Power Gain back in the day or something. I can't exactly remember. But anyways, guys, that's going to be it for our talents. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, this overall coverage of these Dragonflight PTR. It is going to be the talents that are going to be in Dragonflight. I mean, it is subject to change. It could change at any time. Tomorrow they can come out with a patch and change it again. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.